All right. Hello and welcome to Sea Logistics, Get Your Freight Moving. I'm your moderator, Caroline Schmidt. In today's webinar, we will be discussing the impact of global supply chain disruption on sea freight, what to expect, what trends, and what we see in the market, solutions to work around your challenges. We will start out the presentation that guides you through all of those questions, and then we'll have a brief Q&A session. Feel free to put your questions that come up during the session into the Q&A, and we will answer as many as we can. I want to introduce you to our two experts, Benjamin Hopwood, the head of supply chain at Gembah, and Zach Youngquist, Gembah's logistics project manager. Benjamin is a global leader in supply chain management across multiple global centers. He has over 15 years of global product development, manufacturing, and supply chain, and he's fluent in complex hardware product lifecycle development. Zach is a 5-year veteran in end-to-end logistics, and prior to joining Gembah, he worked with Mondo, bringing products from manufacturers and artists across the world into the homes of customers everywhere. All right, we will go ahead and get started.
All right, well, thank you, Caroline. I'm excited to get to talk with everyone today. So as we look at this problem, I think if you're joining us, it's likely that there's been a little bit of pain that you've been feeling over the past couple months and even quarters. Whether that's coming from clients, it's coming internally within your organization, or from elsewhere. I think that when we see that the global leadership within governments starts taking notice that there's big things afoot. So part of what we wanted to start out with today was just talking about where are we now and how we got here. Part of it, so just a number of things that we're seeing. We're seeing reliability down on our containers overseas. We're seeing cost increases that include 4x, in some cases 5x what you may have been seeing before. And with that, we're seeing rate increases, sometimes twice a month. But at the very least once a month. So this is a growing issue where consumers who are farther down the line may not be fully aware of everything that's happening, but certainly clients and businesses in the B2B side of things already are well aware that things are not moving as they should be, and as such prices are rising. Part of this, when we begin to look at how did we get here, one of the big things that obviously many of you are dealing with is that when the beginning of the pandemic started globally, we saw consumer spending drop off considerably in many areas, and then it's rebounded to a point to where we saw over 10% increases in both Q1 and Q2, and we'll be talking a little bit more about this later, but we're seeing this bullwhip effect that's going on, and as such, we're very capacity constrained in many different areas. Whether you're talking about ports or you're talking about inland, and then we're seeing continued not just congestion, but then also stoppages to where then anything else that ends up happening. So, like for instance, if you were shipping out of Ningbo last week, you're well aware that there was a typhoon that came through there. And suddenly this just exacerbates what's been going on in both delaying shipments, but then also increasing prices throughout it, and quite frankly, increasing uncertainty. And as such, for those of you that are familiar with Bullwhip, is that we start to get companies that start to try and predict in a way of and predict and protect. And in doing so, that ends up leading to additional problems. Overall, this becomes like a cyclical type of problem that as an example. So if we were to look at the West Coast in the U.S. today, specifically around LA, in the news we're seeing over 60 container ships off the coast, which is a really big problem because this is well over their capacity to handle. And then we're seeing backlogs in the inland container shipping yards, which then lead to a shortage of drayage and then OTR truck capacity, which then on the rail side of things start to get over capacity, and then we don't have the ability to move for the containers. And so we start to see shortages, and it feels like there's whack-a-mole going on, where we're having to try and predict where the next shortage is going to be, and but then the bottleneck ends up moving. And so from there, we see decreased containers going back to China. We're seeing empty containers go back to China. Some of the recent regulation that some people are starting to talk about, and we're seeing increased blank sailing. So along with an increase in extra loading. Part of what's happening is on the operations side is actually very predictable. One of the things, if you'd like to look up, you can look into queuing theory. I remember I lived overseas for many years, and I remember going into one of the banks, and one of the banks just consistently had longer lines than anyone else, to the point where you would wait 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 50 minutes. And I remember a good friend of mine was brought in for consulting on that, and began to look at what does queuing theory tell us. Part of it is that as we look at increased or overcapacity types of models, we start to see the wait times start to go up, and they don't go up in a linear way. And as many of you know, we as people oftentimes think in linear ways, but the reality is that when we start to deal with models that are not linear in nature, that we start to become bad at predicting exactly what's going to happen. But part of it is, I just wanted to just stop here and say, you know, as we look at the TEUs that are going on, we see this to where we're definitely over where we could have been. And as we move to higher and higher utilization rates, we're going to be continuing to see longer and longer wait times as this goes through both this month and then into next quarter. But that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Zach to talk a little bit more about what does the cost of waiting look like.
Thanks, Benjamin. Yeah, so I wanted to kind of start this off giving you know, a quick story of a colleague of mine who had just a tough time with a particular shipment earlier in the year. You know, essentially he was looking for kind of that golden rate that was going to get his costs back to a little closer to where he was looking at on previous shipments. Through that process of waiting, you know, he would look for what he thought, go to the next month, prices continue to increase, went to the next month, prices continue to increase. Thought he had a great booking. It was too low. Nobody actually picked it up. So went to the next month and ended up spending a good, you know, $8,000 over the rate that he initially looked at. And, you know, lost 4 months of time where he would have had product to sell that was now just sitting overseas. You know, so while we all want to look at getting the best rate, trying to get our costs down to where we're used to seeing them, it's just not likely to happen currently. If we look at the Freightos Baltex index, and this is for China, East Asia to the North American West Coast, we can see the sharp increases that have happened over the past 6 months alone. And you can see around the mid of August there, we do have dips that occasionally happen. However, we're having to book so far out. Typically, by the time that you know that those dips are happening, it's likely too late to secure a booking in that timeline. And so as we look at this, most carriers are implementing a general rate increase on the 1st and 15th of every month. At the very least, we're looking to see one once every month. Typically it's 2. I think in June, we even saw 3 rate increases come out from a few of our carriers. So that's something that we want to keep in mind, is that, you know, every 14 days roughly, those prices are going to increase. We're generally seeing anywhere from $1,000 to $3,000 of increase per FEU, and that's once we take into account the premium rates that most of us are paying to secure containers. As we look at that Freightos index, that's looking at the posted tariff rates that each of the carriers are putting out. However, with the capacity as low as it is, we're typically going to be paying higher than this. I know right now the index is roughly at 21,000. We're seeing up to double that in some cases. And so part of what we also want to look at here is the increase in OTR and drayage rates. We're seeing anywhere from 1.5 to 34% month over month and 34% year over year. Those are also continuing to increase as we see, the backlog that's sitting at our major ports like LA that Benjamin was talking about earlier. That's just continuing to decrease the capacity that our truckers have to move freight out of those ports. The wait time as they move those is increasing, which means we have less drayage capacity to actually get those containers out as well. And that's leading to rising costs there. Another thing that we want to be looking for is those too good to be true quotes. A lot of times we are seeing, quotes come in that look great to clients, but they're too low to actually secure a booking. So what ends up happening is they waste valuable time. That next general rate increase comes in and they've ended up spending more than they would have going with a quote that's going to secure a booking. And so the question that a lot of us are going to have at this point is when will this end? And the real answer here is we don't know. Nobody knows. Everybody in the industry kind of has their ideas of what they think, but things are changing every day. And so, we won't know when it's cleared up until we're well on the path to getting there. A few trends that you can watch for, so you can kind of keep an eye on things yourself, look at how things are trending, is COVID recovery. And that's going to look a lot into vaccination, how the countries that your logistics are operating in are responding to things and what their rates are. If we look into China particularly, the government is typically very quick to shut down terminals or entire ports due to a small number of COVID cases. And so those, 1 week, 2 week shutdowns, recently looking in the Shanghai region as well, we had a lot of shutdowns that we're still recovering from getting ships out of there and seeing delays due to those. While we continue to have the possibility of those shutdowns, it's going to be hard for us to really recover from this. Another big thing to look at is the clearing out of the backlog in these domestic ports like LA. We had good trends getting there. They've jumped back up. Clearing out that backlog is going to be important to moving the containers here in the US quicker so we can get them back to China and ready for more freight. That's going to cure a lot of our issues in China. And so we really want to look at the domestic portion first for getting some trends on where we're headed. A big part of that everybody's looking to is Lunar New Year. And so as China and other countries that celebrate Lunar New Year come in, we'll have a decrease in shipments coming to the US. So what's going to be key is looking at how the ports are able to clear out, what that decrease actually looks like compared to previous years. If we look at the total US retail sales over the past 4 years, we see the steep incline that's happened, that sharp drop off in 2020, and then the huge increase in 2021. We are on a slight downtrend right now. If that continues, that would be a good sign for being able to clear that backlog out in Lunar New Year. And that's going to be one of the biggest things that we can look for to see this start to correct itself. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Benjamin if he has anything else to add on this.
Yeah, so again, as Zach talked about, really what we'd like to do, at least today, and we'll go into a question and answer session after this, is to really begin trying to equip you to begin looking at what are other people looking at in terms of to actually tell which way the trend is going. Because as Zach said, there's a lot of groups that are saying, well, we think that it's going to be Chinese Lunar New Year, where this is going to clear out. But the reality of it, and I think something that's quite important to note, is that may not be the case. And that's a very, very important thing, especially for those of you that are on the promise keeper side of things, as on the operations piece, is to note that while most people are saying like, Lunar New Year sounds like a good time for this to clear out, we may well be into Q2 or Q3 of next year before we start to see operations resume as normal. And so with that said, what are some things though that that we're talking to our clients about as we look at strategies for beginning to move your freight? One of the first ones is really looking deeply at triaging what products you have and what needs to be shipping. And this is something that, from a logistics standpoint, this requires multiple different groups within organizations to come together to really talk about what is the effect on your organization of products. And instead of being kind of in that analysis paralysis situation where, yes, pricing is high, really beginning to say, okay, from a triage standpoint, what needs to be moving now? What could move if we see prices decrease to a larger degree? And then what are products that for instance, we would want to see pricing returned and operations returned to a much more normal scale? The reason why I say this is because when you look at both revenue stream, there's the push now for many different organizations. Okay, it's got to be out for the holiday season. It's got to be out for Q1, got to be out for Q2. But the reality is that some of your products are going to be much more sensitive to potential losses in market share, where if you have a competitor, people are placing their bets on where they can begin to not just be defensive, because most of the people, when we talk to them, are taking a defensive type of feel to this, as opposed to there are other groups out there that are taking an offensive look to where saying, this too shall pass, right? This will be done, whether that's in a year or shorter than that. And so this is the opportunity to actually gain market share where you may have other groups who lose significant market share simply because they're going to be out of stock. And so being very strategic about that within the organization is going to be an important critical piece to success, we believe, moving into not just Q4, but then also Q1 and Q2 of next year. The second one is that for those of you who may be hearing from your logistics department or from operations, like, we just can't move the cargo. Zach has covered this. The reality is that cargo is moving today. We have different freight forwarders that we use that, for instance, you can have a confirmation within 24 hours, and generally speaking, you're on a boat within 5 days. This is coming out of China, as an example. Those types of services require a premium type of service in terms of what the payment is for that. But we wanted to be clear that is available. And so this goes back into that triaging situation, which is that if you have in category 1, absolutely must be out, then looking at those premium services can get your product into stock and avoid stock outage. And if it's a 2, then you're looking for those dips that are going to be coming into play over the coming months. But again, as Zach said, not necessarily waiting continually unless it's in a category 3. So again, the key comment here is that we are seeing containers move, but they're moving at premiums that many groups you may not be privy to, simply because someone down lower in your organization is simply telling you, like, nope, like they're just discounting it as it's not even a possibility. The third one, and I think that many groups have talked about this, but beginning to look at when you're trying to ship full container loads, if you've been seeing those full containers, and again, there's premium services that can move those full containers. But if you have full containers that have not been moving and you're looking for lower rates, then breaking that up into LCL shipments, oftentimes we're seeing both significantly lower pricing as well as faster ship times. Now, I'd put this into kind of like the medium category of like, you're going to see medium cost down with like medium reduction in time in doing that. But that said, if it's in a category 2, you may want to look at starting to change those over to less than container load shipments in order to get it moving. The final one is just really beginning to look at who you're leveraging in your own supply chain, who are the partnerships that you have? Oftentimes what we're finding is that partners who may have been successful in business as usual types of scenarios are not being as successful within this environment. And so making sure that you're aligning your organization with groups that if they say that they can move it, that they can really move it, and then really making sure that that makes sense for you as an organization with the margins that you have, as well as with the strategic goals of your organization. Because in some cases, capturing that market share is possible, even if it's painful, but it's an opportunity type of outlook as opposed to just looking at defensive types of strategies. So with that said, Gembah, for us, what we're really excited about, what gets us up in the morning is getting your product manufactured and getting it delivered. So for our clients, we have a number of different strategies that we talk to them about. Oftentimes, as you know, your situation is unique. And so we're happy to meet with you to discuss that. And we hope that this short little informational has been helpful, not just right now, but also as you look into moving into Q4 of this year, that you'll be able to start to see what are some of the milestones, what are some of the trends that as they begin to change, that can help you know whether you need to change your strategy and your tactics as you progress into 2022. With that, I'll go ahead and close and we'll open it up for question and answers.
All right, great. We have a lot of questions that center around something similar to what you covered during the presentation, but I just wanted to give you potentially an opportunity to answer a little bit more around it. But there's questions around if costs will normalize or this is the new norm. And then I also have a specific example from someone that has a major customer that says they're not certain that this will improve and this may be the new reality. Do you think there's any validity to this perspective?
Zach, would you like to take either one of those?
Yeah, so I'll start with, I think that we are definitely going to see the prices come back down. The reality is that for a lot of manufacturers, and unfortunately this is going to really hurt the little guy, just can't afford to see these prices continue the way they are. And at some point that will start to eat into the shipper's business, and they will have to bring the prices down to accommodate. Currently, there's lots of new ships, lots of new containers being put out into the market. And so if the market starts to drop off due to these price increases, it will have to level out in some way. Now the question of will these return back to pre-pandemic levels, I think that remains to be seen. I don't know that we will go back to, the days when we were spending, say, like $3,500 to get a full container into Central Texas. That being said, I don't think that the market as a whole can sustain $20,000, $30,000 containers coming into the US.
All right, great. The next question is, what ports do we want to avoid in China and in the US?
Yeah, so I can speak a little bit to this. When we're looking at ports in China, I don't think that there's necessarily ports that we're looking to avoid. Like, in other words, like that you can predictively say in 2 months' time, you definitely don't want to be in this port or that port. What we are seeing is we're seeing, again, it's a capacity constrained issue. Part of it's not just port facilities, but it's also things like containers. And so because that's happening, what we're seeing the shipping lines do is that they're prioritizing sailings and specific ones to the larger ports in terms of leaving it. Now, I know that there's a lot of strategies out there trying to find additional capacity that go to smaller ports. And that said, that's definitely an option for you, in terms of looking into creative solutions to this. But that said, is just that the key piece here is that if you're going out of a major port, that generally is going to mean that there's more opportunity if you're time constrained. Like, if what you really need is you need your product to ship staying at those larger ports and really looking at, okay, what are the price premiums that are really necessary in order to keep your shipping on time is probably your better strategy. As we look at becoming more cost conscious on that side of it, if you have time that you can trade for cost, and as Zach said, be very careful here, because it's easy for all of us to deceive ourselves that like something is going to change and allow you to just wait another 2 weeks or 3 weeks when we already know that the costs are going up on a bi-monthly basis. That in that case, you're going to want to start to look at smaller ports. Now, on the US side, obviously, some of the big challenges that we're seeing is going into ports in the LA region. Now, this is commonly a congestion choke point for the US. But with that said, like data is still, 2 weeks from a reporting standpoint behind us. Obviously, people can count the number of ships that are off port, but like starting to go into that, you're gambling a lot, assuming that's going to resolve itself. From a wait time standpoint, we 2 weeks ago we were seeing wait times between 7 to 10 days going into that region. Now we're looking at 14 days, just to get it processed. And so the expectation would be that unless something changes significantly, we're not going to be seeing those wait times go down. We're going to be seeing them continuing to scale up as we go into the October time period, where we're going to see a rush of product that's coming in for the holiday season, at least in the US. Now, from an option standpoint, obviously you're going to have places like the ports outside of Houston that are options if you go through the Panama Canal and if you're serving the US side of things. But then on the East Coast side of it, normally speaking, we would see ports that, for instance, like Savannah, as well as some of the larger East Coast ports that are options. And in each case, like going and triaging and deciding where are these products really going, because in the past, where it may have been fairly easy to go by rail or to go by trucking, obviously we're seeing significantly longer wait times in terms of going cross country. That said, most of what we've talked about right now has been East Asia, but there's also a lot of information that we have that's coming out of South America, as well as other areas where there's just strategies that can be used to assess what the wait time is going to be, and then that ends up impacting which port you want to go to.
All right, I just wanted to give everyone a heads up. We're getting a lot of questions, so we'll answer one more question, close out the session, and the team will remain on the line to answer some of your questions. So we want to make sure we get to everyone today. Last question, does Lunar New Year mean that prices will be higher during that time, or that there will be no boats moving during that time?
Yeah, so from a cost standpoint, the indicator is pointing towards costs are going to be continuing to increase all the way into Chinese lunar or into the Lunar New Year time period, especially if you're talking about China. That said, what's happening is that the ports will be closing down in China, and as such, that will cause that we're not going to see things shipped. The other piece of this is obviously the factories and the sub-suppliers are going to be shutting down in the weeks running up to this, and then we'll see a hard port shutdown, and so for the shipping lines, what they'll be able to do is to start moving some of their capacity to other areas for that period of time. Now, from a prediction standpoint, and again, this is just my sense on this one, is that it's likely that we're going to see a rush into the Lunar New Year, and unless something changes significantly, we're going to be seeing a lot of product that did not make the Lunar New Year ship date. And as such, when those ports open up again, we're going to see another rush of product that's moving through the system, trying to catch up into the Q2 timeframe for clients that manufactured prior to Chinese in the Chinese New Year, if you're in China, but then didn't make the window, and so I had to wait. So again, some of the, as we talk to the larger groups, the amount of shipping that has been reserved far exceeds what the capacity is. And so unless something significant changes on that, we do expect to see higher rates going into that time period. And then from our standpoint, like you may see continued congestion all the way into Q2, if not Q3 of next year.
All right, as discussed, we'll be closing this out, but we'll remain on the line to answer questions for those of you that need to leave at the half hour. Just a couple notes, we'll be sending out the link to the session as well as an opportunity to book a session with Zach. If you have specific questions or need help with your logistics issues, he can help answer some of those more specific questions. We also have an upcoming webinar in 2 weeks on the 28th, talking about emerging opportunities in Indian manufacturing. So I'm going to go ahead and stop recording, and we'll remain on the line for those of you